Every time I watch a video on RGB modding a CRT, I feel like it starts out with like, this is fatal. If you open a CRT TV, as soon as you unscrew the back, you will be attacked by 20,000 volts of electricity and your bones will fly out of your flesh bag. I'm your cool Uncle Marissa, and consider that my disclaimer. So I have two CRT TVs. Why? Well, there's the one behind me, and that was my first one. And there's one in front of me, which is the one that you will see or have seen if you watch my videos. In any video where I'm showing you something on like a home console, like the flippy drive video, or any of my PS2 videos where I'm demoing something like the Mechapon video, which is a Toshiba and it's a flat screen, as opposed to this, which has a curved screen. I RGB modded this guy fairly soon after I got it, and I think that maybe that will be an inspiring story. And with the Toshiba, I've had it for a while now, and I haven't RGB modded it because it takes component as well as composite. So whoa, let's roll back. What is a CRT?
Okay, here's CRT's deal. CRT is cathode ray tube and is basically the type of TV we all grew up with. You know, that big boxy thing in your living room.
We like to play old consoles on them because there is heated debate on whether old games were made with the CRT output in mind or not. What are the different plugs, AV connections? So the standard, which you see, which is the red, white, yellow, yellow, white, red, that is called composite. Yellow is the video, white and red is the left and right audio. You'll see the white and red on any old analog receiver as well. That is the most common one. That is the only type of AV connection we had on any of our TVs when I was a kid. And by TVs, I think I mean like two. I mean, I imagine like one of them had a SCART connection because I was like a little kid in England, so maybe it had SCART connection. But yeah, anyway, that's the standard one. And then you get a nice leap in quality with component cables. Component cables have the red, green, blue, and then they have two separate red and white cable that deliver audio. So they have 5 cables. Then you go to S-Video. I don't really understand S-Video. It's not something that I ever encountered, but the Toshiba has it, and I actually didn't even realize because I just thought it was RF. RF, that is like a kind of super old form of connection, and it's just one cable, and I'm too young for that to have been in my life, but apparently it looks quite bad, even compared to composite. But S-Video similarly is one cable and it's round, which is why I thought that it was an RF connection. Anyway, I haven't tried that, but from what I understand, that is a huge leap from component, and it is much crisper than component and just much better image fidelity. I believe it, I just haven't tried it. So what is then RGB? Okay, so I'm just the guy, so I'm gonna talk to you like you're just the guy. There's plenty of descriptions online about these that are far more technical. You ever go to an arcade and you just see the CRTs in the arcade cabinets and you got the lines and everything is so crisp and clean, but then, you know, maybe the TV from your childhood or your grandma's house or the one you picked up from the curb with the composite cables, it's more fuzzy and everything's kind of blended and you don't have clear lines. That's RGB. So what is the core difference between your home TV and RGB? So first off, the composite, like we said, it's just the yellow plug is video, right? And so what it's doing is it's synchronizing all of the RGB signal and putting it out onto one. So it's kind of giving you a summary of it. With like component, while it has 3 separate plugs for video, I believe it's doing something similar, but on the 3 separate channels, which is why it looks better. RGB is taking each like signal and clearly transferring it out. So how does the RGB mod work? In essence, in a lot of models of TVs, especially through a specific time period, obviously ones which just have RF connections or ones from like the 80s, early 90s, often are not RGB moddable, and then ones that are much newer may not be RGB model. You have to like look up your model, but basically you have the RGB lines in the TV's board, except they're not activated to come out into the display. So you're hijacking them. You're rerouting it. You're like, we're gonna activate these sleeper cells. And those sleeper cells are like on the jungle chip, and they go to the OSD, which is the on-screen display. So when you change the volume, you see the volume bar go up. When you see the menu, you see the menu come up on screen. And I guess way back when, this would be achieved by basically just no more OSD display. They're all like rerouted to that different purpose. Then we got the Mux mod, which is what I did with this one, where you are able to keep both. You have an on-screen display and you're able to have the RGB actually output. And so the on-screen display is overlaid onto that signal. Does this make sense? I'm trying to make it make sense in like very simple terms. If you want a deeper dive into this, the CRT database, I'll leave a link below, actually talks in detail about how these mods work. And this video is going to talk a lot about Sunthar. Sunthar also has a database, and he does have a sort of intro section where he talks about the technicality of how these mods work. But essentially, that's what you're doing. You're hijacking existing lines, and that's why not every CRT can be modded. One thing to keep in mind, obviously, is how does the output happen? Obviously, we can't do it via composite or anything like that. It needs a specific output. So you have two options. You have BNC and you have SCART. SCART is traditionally European and BNC is a British something connector. A lot of people, when I did my first mod, were really into the BNC connectors, and I don't remember why. I was like, I don't want that, I want SCART. Maybe because I'm familiar with SCART, like I had seen it with my eyes and I'd never seen a BNC connector. And then that's kind of where the money pit starts, because you need SCART connectors, and obviously you are going to need custom made ones, and so you have to buy them. And so these are all really good things to maybe take a look at before you decide to RGB mod your TV, because yeah, your consoles will need special cables. I think it's worth it. Several of the Nintendo consoles use the same cable as well. One thing to note, GameCube cannot do this. GameCube can do component. When I just had this, I bought like a retro tank that does component to SCART. So stupid, but what else was I supposed to do? But now with this TV, I just plug the GameCube straight into component. Anyway, decide which one is better for you, which one's more accessible for you, which shops provide those and ship to you. These are cables that also quality matters, so you can't just grab whatever you see on Amazon or AliExpress. So unfortunately, it is pretty costly. It can be like $30–40 a cable. So now that's out of the way, let me just quickly talk about this. What do you need to know to get started on this in terms of experience, I guess? So you do need to understand what you're doing, and I was very lucky because I kind of was asking online, like, what do I do with this? I got this one. It can be modded. I saw it can be modded. How do I do it? And this one guy was like, I'll walk you through it. And he did. And I think back to that, and I was a mess compared to now. I had this Hako battery-powered soldering iron that I showed off in my toolbox tour as like a blast from the past. It like goes through batteries so quickly. I didn't know what resistors or capacitors were. I didn't know how any of it worked. I remember at one point telling this guy, like, it's crazy how like with the JST connectors, and just you crimp it and then you put it in, and then they like can talk to each other. And he's like, that's he was very nice. And Yes, huge shout out to him. I still see him like helping people online, so I'm really glad that there are people like that. So I kind of also just didn't want to do that again because I needed so much help, and even though I'm a lot smarter and better and I understand how things work a lot more now, I was like, I guess I could do this, but you know, it takes component, it takes S-video, like is it necessary? But then I would look upon my cables of shame, hundreds of dollars of SCART cables, and like, yeah, I could play them on this. But like, this is very beautiful for my videos. Maybe, I don't know. Do you guys think it's cool? But it's actually placed in a very inconvenient area and very difficult to actually access. That's a story for a Feng Shui master and not for you. So yeah, I wasn't really using my SCART cables, I was just using component, and I was like, you know what, let me look and see what there is. If there's like, you know, someone's broken it down. Because a lot of people on the Shmups forums, which is where a lot of this talking of CRT modding takes place, do break down specific TV sets. This is hardly any rare set or anything like that. And then I was like, the world moved on. That's amazing. So let's go back to Sunthar. Sunthar has a website called Sunthar's Super Sector. And a super sector it is indeed. It is a huge database of how to RGB mod almost every TV that can be modded. And I say almost simply because I'm sure there are ones that aren't on there, but the sheer number of ones that are on there are absolutely astounding. And while when I did this mod, you would just wire everything on the board and take the wire and run it and solder it to the SCART connector or BNC connector pins, he's created a MUX board, which you put everything on the board, and while you still do have to do some minor stuff, maybe adding diodes or resistors to the actual CRT's board, it's nowhere near as chaotic as what I did previously. So it's a lot more straightforward and easy to understand. And he also sells kits on his website. He has 3 different versions of the board. You can always email him and ask him which board is right for my TV. And he sells kits, but they're also things that you can buy yourself. I bought all the parts myself, and we'll actually talk about that in a bit as well, because it ended up providing a challenge to me that ultimately was very stupid. Flashback to the upside down SRAM on my very first Pocket Color kind of vibes. And his pages are fairly well laid out. You'll see that some models have a much shorter page and description than others, and it is good to get familiar with the schematics for your TV. And he has links to those on, I think, most of or all of those pages as well. So you can just scroll down to your TV and find the schematic. It's not necessarily something you can do without any knowledge on any set, but it's probably like the easiest out there. I had someone in my Discord I was talking to who was saying that she still thinks she would prefer the old method because she's just so goddamn smart that she can just do it. But for plebs like me, this is a fantastic alternative. Before we get into it, that part at the beginning, right? The danger of it. So, yes, if you open the back of a TV, like just the back shell, it's not gonna explode. It's not gonna shock you. You're gonna be okay. But if you do that and then you start like poking and prodding around, you might hurt yourself. There's this little snake-like suction cup that goes in the back. I think it's called an HV connector. That is like the point of danger. If you like pull it out with your bare hand, yes, you will hurt yourself. If you pull it out and you're somehow fine and then you stick your finger in the hole, you probably will be in a different world than of those you love very shortly after. So yes, there's no danger in just taking the back off, but obviously you don't just need to take the back off and whisper sweet nothings to your TV in order to do this mod use. So you actually do need to discharge it. So here is my advice. I am scared of it. It is actually very satisfying to discharge a TV, but the best thing you can do is take your CRT, unplug it, and just leave it off for like a week, 2 weeks. I left mine off for 2 weeks because I forgot to buy a part. Then when you go to discharge it, there was no charge. There was nothing to discharge because it had slowly discharged over the couple of weeks. But you still want to discharge it, and obviously while you're working on it, if you work on the board and stuff and then you plug it in and there's an issue and you want to check it again, there's probably not a ton of charge built up just from doing a check, but you should discharge it. Otherwise you will bzz. So what do you need to discharge a TV? You need to get a screwdriver, a flathead screwdriver, and you need alligator clips. That's kind of it. And I will show you. I will also put a link in the description of this wonderful gentleman whose YouTube name I can't remember, but I'll also put it here. He shows how to discharge a TV, and it is honestly quite simple as long as you're using common sense. You put one end of the alligator clip on the flathead screwdriver on just near the base or something, and the other on usually TVs will have this metal frame and you can put it there. For some reason mine didn't seem to have one near the top, so I just put it on a screw, and then you just stick the flathead screwdriver under that suction cup and kind of where the hole is, and you should get a little and you shouldn't feel that, but you should hear it. And because you hear it, that's the thing I'm saying is so satisfying, and then it's safe for you to remove and work on. You're gonna be good. You're gonna be okay. It's okay. It's not. Don't be dumb. Just don't be dumb. It's like skateboarding or riding a bicycle. It can be fatal if you're dumb. Wear a helmet. Abide by traffic laws. Anyway, let's take a look at what I did. Sometimes I used to wonder what happened to those kids in school who wouldn't read the entire quiz before answering questions. The teachers used to punk them by having the last question on the quiz be something like, ignore all the other questions, just write your name on the paper and turn it in for 100%, and they would fail every time. Anyway, I found out that as adults, they are now in my YouTube comments, leaving comments without actually watching my video in part or entirety, instead of waiting till the end, where what they said, argued, or asked has already been addressed. But just in case you're in the audience right now and you're still watching, we should read this before we dive in. So the TV that I'm working on is the Toshiba 20AF45, and it shares similarities with 43, 44, and 46 in the series. Of course, they're not exactly the same, as we will see. So right here we have the service manuals, and whatever TV you're working on, definitely pop open that link and get familiar with the schematics. You'll also want to reference it because TV boards are very large. So just taking a look at a photograph and trying to match it up with the board can be challenging. And some boards, like the Toshiba one, the markings are not super clear on the board itself. And so it's best to find a point of reference and then work from there. So off the bat, we see there are two diagrams. This is actually new. You can see right here, it says 2025, March 15th. And there's the sort of standard way, and then there's the way to reduce ringing noise. I personally went ahead and just did this version, the second method, because I didn't want to experience the ringing noise to see if it bothers me. If there's a way to fix something, I'd rather fix it before experiencing it. And I know that these have been updated also, because when I first did this mod, there was a typo on this diagram. So on the right where it says where things should go on the MUX board from Sunthar, it had R1, R2, and R3 as 1.2 K ohms and not 75 ohms. So nothing that is awful, but I'm really glad to see that this has been fixed. Scrolling down here, we see that there is a difference from the beginning between the 4344 and the 4546 models. So in the 4344, you need to remove these components, but not in 45 and 46 because there aren't any edge enhancement circuitries in 45 and 46, which while that might sound, oh, there's no enhancements, that's bad, it's actually good because I guess it's a tale as old as time that every time TVs come shipped with enhancements, they just make the picture look worse. So now we are down to performing the mod, and we're going to scroll down to 45 and 46, and it tells us to remove these 3 resistors, R141, 42, and 43. Now let me tell you why you should read the entire thing, because if you're reading through this the first time and you're just going to do this and you're going to stick the wires here, you're going to miss out. So we want to scroll all the way down here, for what I did, to the alternate method that was mentioned at the top to reduce ringing. So not only do you need to remove the ground resistors, but you also need to remove the SMD caps that are in line and then short them. You also need to remove the 3 jumpers, which again, Sunthar has updated this since I did my mod, and again, I really appreciate that this website is continually being taken care of because the jumpers were not mentioned in the initial version. So I kind of worked backwards based on the schematics for this and the schematics for a similar Toshiba set, though not the ones described in this mod, to understand which jumpers need to be removed. And once we remove those, we can add the diodes and 0.1 UF caps, and they end up being stacked. And we remove the jumpers on the other side. This is my photo, guys. I said you can go ahead and use it, and he did. So I am world famous now. Obviously, remove these first so that you can desolder them completely. The story here is I wasn't sure which jumpers to remove, and so I figured I would just snip them, and that way it would be very easy to resolder a jump in the event that I snipped the incorrect ones. But once I found out that they were correct, I went ahead and desoldered them from the other side, and I got rid of the Kapton tape from this side because since there were no metal bits, I wasn't worried about it shorting. I probably shouldn't have worried about it shorting anyway, but I am a Kapton tape fiend. And then remove caps or bridged, caps and diodes added. We have diodes, which are a component with polarity. So make sure they are the right way. I think a good way to know what you're working on the board, so you can see that like not everything is labeled. So you really have to work backwards based on things that are labeled. This Mecon right here, that, for example, is a really good landmark to work from. And then you attach your wires here, your RGB and blanking, and then your audio sync and ground wires go up here where the process is pretty clear due to these pads being very large, very visible, and so it's very easy to use them as landmarks. Yeah, there might be still a little bit of an error, which I think is funny. So in the original one, R1 through 3, it's set to do 1.2 k ohms, and that was actually meant to be for R4 through 6. So it looks like even though R1 to 3 have been fixed to be 75 ohms, the 1.2 hasn't transferred to R4, 5, 6, unless Sunthar decided that 1 is enough. But the final line here does say that the inline resistors, which are 4 through 6, should be 1.2 k ohms instead of 1 k ohm. So this is part of why I'm saying, like, read the whole thing, because there might be discrepancies, which you can either reach out to him via email and ask him which one is correct, or you can have your own question answered by something giving you clarification later on in the article/guide. Okay, now that we've walked through all of this, let's just see some of it in action, I guess. So here is the mux board that I have, and it is incredibly clearly marked, which is so insanely helpful. And I'm going to pull out the values that For the time being, I know to be correct, but they turn out not to be entirely, as I mentioned earlier. But this isn't a tutorial video, it's more like a demo video, so I'm not too worried about showing you resistors with the wrong bands on them. I did install the diode upside down, and I did fix that off camera, so that's just something to keep in mind. You want the black line facing the IDC connector as opposed to the SCART port. In order to keep the resistors in place before I solder them, I just put Kapton tape over them. A hot tip, the excess that you trim off the resistor legs, if you do need to short anything, either on this board or on the TV's motherboard, hang on to them because you can use them for that. With the female SCART port, I got some 90-degree and some 180-degree angles. The 90 degrees actually is what I went with because that fit better. European SCART ports have a very specific pinout, and again, I really appreciate that Sunthar has it marked on the board what pin does what. And you could get away with just soldering the pins that have a function, but you'll want to solder all of the pins just for the sake of stability. So if there's any joints to be super concerned about in terms of their integrity, it would be the ones that have markings because they perform a function. I bought a ready-made IDC cable. I didn't crimp my own because then I'd have to buy more tools. Just cut off one end and then you can separate the wires from each other. Once the wires are separated, you can use a wire stripper and then tin the tips. The final thing to solder on for this mod is the female connector for the IDC cable. And finally, we can get to the TV itself. So this is a 20-inch TV, but boy, it is heavy, and they are very much front weighted. If you've ever held or lifted or anything a CRT, all the weight is in the front. So I'm not too worried about any issues taking the back off. So I'll be doing that, and then I'll be gently pushing the front of the TV onto a very thick cushion. Now for the discharge that we talked about. So I've got my alligator clip, and normally I would clip it onto a wire frame, but I don't see one. So I found a screw near the top that I am going to clip it onto. The other side will go on the screwdriver. And then we're going to stick it under the anode cap and hit the little metal clips that sit inside that hole. And you should hear a discharge in the event that there is any charge. I didn't hear anything because I had no charge. And then using the anode cap, we can push and pull out the clips. And then you are all right to disengage. From here, we can gently remove the board. Some boards are easier than others to completely disconnect. This one would be a bit too much trouble and require some desoldering, as you can see. So I am just going to work on it on the TV table nearby, but I am going to disconnect everything that can be disconnected, including the power supply. It can be worth taking pictures of how these things are seated before you disconnect them, so that you know where everything goes and the correct orientation. From here, it's just a matter of following the rest of the directions. So I begin by removing the resistors and caps that are necessary to do so. I do keep them to the side and remember where I pulled them from, just in case I accidentally removed the wrong thing, or you want things to be as reversible as possible until you make sure that everything works. That's kind of my MO when I'm modding things. Don't put too much faith in everything to go well. I have put down the diodes and the new capacitors, and I will be adding the wires into that lineup as shown on the guide. The rest of the wires are pulled up to where they belong for the sound and ground. You will have one floating wire. So I used black for ground. You could also use orange for ground, but since I used black for ground, orange will be a floating wire. So what I recommend is making sure that there's no exposed wire on it. So use some wire clippers, and then you can wrap it around the rest of the wires or something. Out of safety, I didn't record it, but I used a Dremel and some plastic cutters to cut the SCART cutout. Now, I did a pretty beautiful job. Unfortunately, it was slightly in the way, so I had to move it up. I ended up filling out the areas that were empty with black Cougar, and it worked amazingly well. And I'm just using hot glue on the back of the screws. I would have loved to use nuts, but I don't have any. So my little oopsie daisy, my little what was that kind of thing, I spent I think 2, maybe 3 days losing my absolute mind, because I had done everything according to the instructions, but when I would turn the TV on, there was this loud buzzing, and when I would plug something into the SCART, it was like a blue screen, nothing would show up, and then all of a sudden it would turn off. I followed the directions. I emailed Sunthar and he didn't seem to really find anything immediately wrong. And he did mention though that there was a typo on a diagram on the page. And while that did give me a big sense of relief because I was like, oh, here's a solution, I was also like, I think we also both know that the resistors, it can't be the resistors causing this. This seems to be a significant voltage issue, and I'm not even getting a display. I talked to this person on my Discord who I was saying earlier is incredibly smart, and she has experience with these things, and she was also kind of having a lot of trouble figuring it out too. We were all stumped. And I ended up sending Sunthar pictures that he asked for of literally everything. And you know, when I'd sent him pictures earlier of the MUX board and of my TV's board and a video of the behavior, I hadn't thought to send him a picture of the IDC cable because IDK. I thought that was obvious, and he told me, he was like, you crimped it backwards. Okay, that offended me because I did not crimp it myself, but I didn't know that they were not a standard. I thought they were a standard. My brain just assumed that they had a standard orientation, because have you seen a rainbow in your life? You know Roy G. Biv? We're taught Roy G. Biv. It's always Roy G. Biv. It's never Vib G. Yor. So I was like, an IDC 10-pin rainbow cable is gonna be a rainbow. And obviously I did cross-check. I did look at my cable and I looked at his website. And when you do just like this, it's like, yeah, it's the same colors. We're good. They're in the same order. But no, they were flipped. They were flipped on mine. Why would they do this to me? Because there's no standard. I didn't know there was no standard. I thought it was Roy G. Biv. Yeah. But yeah, so it was backwards. So that made absolute sense. That made sense why the TV was like, I don't know what's happening and my head hurts. Also keep in mind, I say this a lot, but I live in a small space. So there was this TV on its face on the ground. You guys saw a video of it. And I was like, my heart was racing all the time that something terrible was gonna happen and it was going to break. Like one of my cats was gonna decide to like fly at it and then the tube just, well, it was terrible. So I was like, okay, so then what other options do I have? You know, another thing, I actually don't love the wires in this IDC cable. They're those really flimsy wires, and the tubing kind of, it melts so easily. The wires fray so easily. It's just very cheap. So I was like, I'd love to use my own wires. I've got pretty quality wires. So I'll just crimp my own. No, so apparently you can't just like make it out of individual wires. You need to use an actual flat cable roll to make one. And all the flat cable rolls that I could find with like 1 or 2 day shipping were like filled with reviews with the same complaint I had with the one I used, where they had crappy wires. So what's the point? So instead, I just had to rewire my brain and like tell myself that 2 + 2 is 5, and heat shrink helped because I have some heat shrink, and like I did manage to like edit the colors, and I rewired it backwards and it worked, and it's beautiful. And Cool Uncle's lesson of the day is IDC cables are not universal rainbow IDC cables, because apparently there are 2 definitions of the rainbow, but I'm glad it didn't do any significant damage or anything. By the way, you may have noticed in these clips that I'm soldering a lot like on the ground, and you might be thinking, damn, she's got a lot of conveniently placed outlets. But no, actually we have the opposite of that. We have some conveniently placed outlets that literally don't work. They don't work on an electrical level, and the landlord was just like, oh well. So I am kind of like limited in where I can solder, and so this one was pretty scary for me of like, how am I gonna solder the board without having necessarily the space or being able to like lift it. It's heavy. I'm just a little guy. What really came in handy was this power bank. This is the INIU Cougar. If you know me, you might know why I picked it. No, I'm kidding. But it is a fast charging bank sent to me for review by the kind folks at INIU. And it has 3 ports. I'm actually using it to power one of my lights now because it died. And I was like, oh, you need power. But it has 2 USB-C and 1 USB-A. And the USB-A is 18 watts, and you have one 45 watt and one 100 watt USB-C. And the pine cell soldering iron, which is what I have, it takes, I think, 85 watts max. But what's cool about USB-C is that the devices communicate with each other and the power draw is negotiated. So I'm able to plug it into the 100 watt and it will negotiate what it needs as opposed to being like overwhelmed. That's how I was able to solder on the ground, was just with this guy. It was able to fully power my soldering iron until it reached 34%. Once it got to 34%, then my soldering iron started glitching out. But you'd have to be soldering a really long time for it to drop to 34%. This was over the course of a few days, and in between that, I had charged like my phone and some other devices on it. I don't necessarily recommend charging things on it that take a very low charge. For example, the Playdate, just at the risk of deteriorating the battery. Everything else, like your Steam Deck, your Switch, your soldering iron, this light right now, this is incredibly handy. So thank you to INIU for sending me a unit to play around with. If you would like to grab your own charging bank, you can use my code Marissa10, that's capital M, lowercase Arissa, and the number 10 for 10% off your purchase. Now back to CRTs. After all of this, we have done it. And by we, I mean me and anyone who's helped me through this. And the TV is RGB modded. If it hadn't been for that one snafu of me not realizing the thing about rainbow cables, this would have been done in like one sitting, and so easily. It's kind of mind-blowing how easy it is. So should you do it? I think that if you are willing to invest in like SCART cables and you have a TV that just has composite and is RGB moddable, I think it's a really great idea to do because the image quality bump is absolutely incredible and it really feels like, it's magical. But if you have like either maybe a really nice CRT PC monitor, or you have a TV that takes component and or S video already, I don't think you need a RGB modded CRT unless you want to do it for fun. I don't think it's like a requirement. I don't think it will be so mind-blowing. Again, the only reason I RGB modded this guy is because of the fact that I have all these SCART cables and I don't want them to just sit like a dragon's treasure hoard and not be put to use. I hope this video was informative. I hope if you didn't know about RGB modding CRTs, that's something that you feel a bit more informed on, maybe even curious about. And if it's something that you did know about and or were curious about already, I hope this was a easy to understand and easy to absorb observation of where we are right now in terms of how we can RGB mod something with more ease, and B, watching me do it and, maybe thinking of like, oh, is it really that easy? Or like, oh, that looks really hard. I hope it let you gauge that as well. Thank you so much to everyone in like the CRT modding community for putting forward such resources. A huge thank you to my Ko-fi subscribers. You support me so much. It is so helpful. You give me the purpose and encouragement to keep making videos. And also, if you do subscribe to my Ko-fi, you get extra videos. I do game reviews every month, and I also do like blog posts on little projects. This was actually possibly supposed to be a Ko-fi video, but I was like, you know what? I think they can handle it. So show me you guys could handle this video, and don't explode. I've been your cool Uncle Marissa, and don't forget that you are always welcome at Cool Uncle's house. I will see you in the next one. Bye for now.